Hi, Alexia Russell here. Today on The Detail, the free trade deal that was expected to take years of relationship building, but sprinted over the finish line.
India has just signed another big trade deal, this time with New Zealand. It's been called a major breakthrough. The deal was concluded in just 9 months, and it's expected to double the volume of trade between India and New Zealand in just 5 years.
India has signed another trade pact, this time with New Zealand. And it's being called a historic breakthrough.
We are ready to step up together and take responsibility for a bright partnership.
It's a stamp that New Zealand and India relations are moving to the next level.
The agreement hasn't been ratified yet, but negotiations are complete. The deal's done. Now we're just waiting for both our parliament and theirs to vote on it. But why would the world's most populous country of 1.4 billion people bother signing a trade deal with a country of just 5 million after decades of failed negotiations? Here's Sam Sachdeva, Newsroom's National Affairs Editor.
I think the government, to its credit, did walk the talk. You saw multiple visits by Todd McClay. I think he said he's been there 8, 9, 10 times. Christopher Luxon went. That was the first visit by a New Zealand Prime Minister in, it must have been close to a decade, I think. Winston Peters himself went a few times. So you've had those political level visits, but I think there's been other delegations, business delegations that have gone over there. So I think that has helped kind of smooth the path that you can say, look, yes, we want to do this deal, but actually let's just learn more about each other. Let's have these discussions, sit down. So I think that has helped a lot, really, that India has seen, look, actually we are serious about this and we do want an improved relationship with you.
And what does India get out of it? Gaurav Sharma, a senior journalist with the RNZ Asia team, says when it comes to this deal, you can talk about immigrant visas and opportunities for students, but it's mainly about geopolitics.
In the last couple of years or so, India has started looking at the defence ties with New Zealand.
The two countries also agreed to sign a defence cooperation pact and enhance maritime safety efforts.
We are the third of the Five Eyes countries India has signed a deal with. Australia and the UK have beaten us to it, and agreements are underway with the US and Canada. It's about making the right kind of friends and forming connections with friendly countries at a time when international alliances are being turned upside down. So let's have a closer look at what's in this deal. Putting dairy aside, New Zealand gets plenty out of it. Reduced or eliminated tariffs on 95% of our exports for a start.
Now, for India, does a market of 5 million make a big difference? Probably not, let's be honest. So I don't think the deal for Indian exporters is really about the access that they get into our market.
14 months ago, Sam talked to me about the slim prospects of getting a trade deal with India signed in this term of government. The Indian High Commissioner was pouring cold water on the short timeline. Sam told me it wasn't looking good.
Christopher Luxon made that perhaps ill-advised pre-election commitment that he'd get a deal signed in his first term.
A commitment which Chris Hipkins rubbished during an election debate in 2023.
How can you commit to a free trade agreement with India when India are saying that they won't commit to one with New Zealand?
Yeah, we have been so inward-looking.
Are you going to go and tell them that they have to have a free trade agreement with us? Are you going to succeed where John Key and Murray McCulley and all the others before failed?
Fast forward to late last year.
And I'm very pleased to announce that New Zealand has now concluded a free trade agreement with India. This is a landmark deal with the world's largest country and the world's fastest growing big economy that will create opportunities for jobs, exports and growth for all New Zealanders.
Now, the details of the agreement are starting to emerge, but a lot of it's still a mystery. One coalition partner wants nothing to do with it. The opposition's been asked to support it, but until recently didn't know what was in it. There's fear-mongering over immigration and confusion about what it all means. A lot of it from the Trade Minister himself.
The Trade Minister is under renewed pressure over what exactly is in New Zealand's free trade agreement with India.
I asked Sam if this is the outstanding deal the Prime Minister says it is.
Look, I think it is probably as good as we could have hoped for. Is it outstanding? Well, it depends on how you look at it. If you're in the dairy industry, you would say no, because there is very little in there for dairy. So not great for Fonterra or our exporters, but that was always going to be the case. I think we knew from the start that India was not going to offer much in that space. But look, I think for a number of other exporters in agriculture, horticulture, it will be a boon. I was at an event the other week, and you had, some people there saying at the moment we pay $140,000 in tariffs for each shipping container of lamb we send to India. And we're going to have save the vast majority of that once this deal comes in. So, look, I think it is going to be a big benefit for New Zealand, but it's not without some fishhooks. Very good outcome for the wine industry. I think they have paid huge tariffs to get into India, and that's basically made it, almost impossible to get a foothold in the market. And now to have dramatically improved access, I think, is going to be a big win.
Sam, what's the best bit in this for us? What's the best bit for them?
So for us, you have a market of 1.4 billion people, not million, billion with a B.
It's almost hard to comprehend that number.
I know. So that's it. It's just the scale, right? And if you look at what happened with the China Free Trade Agreement, which is now roughly the same population, would have been over 1 billion, I think, at the time that the FTA with them was signed in 2008. That had a huge benefit for exporters because all of a sudden you've got this massive market that you haven't had a huge amount of access to or invested resource into. So that is a big win. Now, for India, it's kind of interesting because you go, all right, well, New Zealand's a market of 5 million people. What do we get out of that? And the answer is if you're trying to sell goods here, not much. So, I don't think Indian exporters are looking at New Zealand and going, oh, great, we can finally sell our wares there. And there's the fact that, we've already dropped our tariffs for a lot of countries for a long time. So I think the big benefit from them comes in terms of labour mobility. And when I say that, I mean visas for students, visas for temporary workers. So that is the big benefit for India, but that is also the element of the deal that has been most politically contentious within New Zealand, as I think, many people will have seen in the last few months.
The visa issue, where up to 5,000 workers on our green list of skills shortages can come in for 3 years and bring their families, is one reason why New Zealand First won't support the deal. National needs Labour's help because of that. And over the weekend, Chris Hipkins expressed concerns and sought assurances from the government, especially over migrant worker exploitation and protections for victims of modern slavery. He sent the PM a letter detailing Labour's issues with the agreement, including the increased flows of international students. Under Winston Peters' maths, 5,000 workers and their partners and kids means 20 to 25,000 Indians coming into New Zealand. There are also tweaks to student visas, and that worries him too.
Well, you've got a huge chasm or gap between what the Indian government is saying and what the Prime Minister is saying, of New Zealand is saying. And they're saying that the professional pathways in New Zealand have no numerical caps. Hear that phrase? No numerical caps.
But there are no caps on international students from any country.
The main thing is that we cannot discriminate solely against Indian students in this deal. We can't have a cap in place on students from India, but have it open slather for any country. But if we wanted to do a cap across the board, we could do that. If we wanted to, put new restrictions in place on what sort of institutes are allowed to open in New Zealand and teach these international students, we can do that. So there is a bit of leeway to put other sort of safeguards in place.
What are Winston Peters' objections, and are they based in realism, or is he just dog whistling?
Look, I think it's probably a little bit of column A and a little bit of column B. I think he shares some of the concerns that have been expressed about the quality of education institutions bringing in students and whether or not we would have a repeat of what's happened in the past where, students come in and get visas for questionable courses. There's also concern around these temporary work rights and how many people might come in. His concern or talking point has been like, yes, there's this 5,000, but obviously they can apply to bring in family members. And people can already do that when you're filling skills on the green list, but He's arguing, look, the government's saying it's 5,000 people, but actually it'll be more like 20,000 people by the time they bring in their spouses and children and so on. So I think this is not surprising. New Zealand First has long been sceptical about immigration. That's something they hammer all the time. So I think, does he genuinely hold concern? Yes. Is it also politically expedient to be, kicking up about this in an election year when you're trying to make sure you stay in power for a second term and you want to grow your share of the vote? That's absolutely true as well.
As for the Green List workers, they'll have to go home after their 3 years are up and stay home for another 3 years before they can apply again. Gaurav Sharma says that's a call to singles, not families.
If you just talk about numbers, I always argue that if it's 5,000 or 20,000, Indians are earning more than 20% of the median income. So I would argue not a single Indian will ever be a burden to New Zealand economy. Indians come here, prosper, and they contribute to the growth story of New Zealand. But even if you look at just 5,000, what the number the government said, I mean, they are on temporary entry visa. The normal work visa that you get as compared to the mention in FTA, the rules are stricter here. So you get the visa for 3 years and then you have to go back to India and then there is a stand-down period of 3 more years. So that is not appealing to Indians at all. Because, you just imagine. So Winston Peters is saying that they will bring their family. Will you disrupt your family and children will leave school, come here because you already know that you have to take them back for 3 years? No, nobody is going to do that. So the visa mentioned in FTA is not at all appealing because Indians come here because there is a pathway. You come on work visa, you get residency, you get permanent residency. Then after 7 years, you become a citizen, right? So there is a pathway. But if there is no pathway, that is not at all appealing. So I don't understand this debate at all.
What we want is clarity from the government about what the different things that they've signed us up to actually mean.
I guess a few years ago, there was a big deal about shonky, sort of Indian-run English language schools and people being brought in under the guise of education but actually sleeping on the floor of Indian restaurants. This is the sort of thing that sticks in people's minds when they talk about migrant labour.
Exactly, and I think that is the concern of the Labour Party and possibly also New Zealand First, who were the first to say that they wouldn't support this, is we've had this history in the past where you've had establishments or education institutes of questionable quality that have been seen as, visa farms, for lack of a better word. So, is this risking a repeat? What do we need to do to ensure that doesn't happen again? So, look, I think it is a valid concern, whether or not you have to deal with that by shutting off visa access or if it's just about clamping down on our domestic regulations and making sure that, these education providers that are set up are of a sufficient quality. That's I guess, where some people might disagree.
Because it was a bit open slather, wasn't it? It was, but here's my 2 pieces of paper. Can I start a language school, please, sir? Yes.
Exactly, and I think the last government did crack down on that, so you saw a lot of those questionable providers go out of business or lose their licences. So I think there are safeguards in place, but it's just a matter of making sure they are, sufficiently rigorous to protect against a repeat.
Another aspect of the deal that Labour's expressed fears over is a requirement for our government to promote $20 billion US, and that's 33 billion New Zealand dollars of New Zealand investment over 15 years. If that doesn't happen, India can start rolling back the deal. I asked Sam if that was realistic.
Look, it depends who you talk to. Some people in the business community and the government are saying this is kind of going to naturally happen. You're going to have New Zealand businesses who haven't had a footprint in India go in there, make new connections, say, oh yeah, actually we do want you to manufacture this product for us and invest the money in. So, look, maybe there's a chance it just happens, on its own, but that is a large sum of money. I guess the caveat in that Todd McClay and the government have been very careful to make is that we're supposedly not on the hook for making sure we reach that 20 billion target. We just have to promote the target and promote investment into India. So if we don't get all the way to that number, as long as we make a good go of it, then supposedly we should be fine. But it's an interesting one because the Indians have been very clear in saying there are what they're calling clawback mechanisms. So if we don't make a good enough effort to get to that number and the 15 years is up, they could say to us, actually, we're going to roll back some of your access to our markets for, potentially apples, potentially kiwi fruit, potentially wine. We haven't seen the details of the agreement yet, but they can take back some of those tariff reductions. So, in 15 years' time, that is going to be a very interesting discussion for the two governments to have if we haven't got particularly close to that figure.
Yeah, and also, I guess it needs to be pointed out, this is not taxpayer money necessarily. This could be Zespri planting kiwi fruit vines or...
Exactly. I think that the idea is that pretty much none of this should be government money, that it should all be coming from the private sector. Whether the private sector feels that way is probably a different matter. I'm sure they would love to see the government come to the party and put some money in. But yes, it's not about taxpayer money. It's about, businesses, New Zealand businesses going, investing, setting up new manufacturing plants, facilities, or making, whatever other investments they wish to in India.
How much of it is point scoring on the world stage at a time when America's becoming more isolationist?
Yeah, look, I think that did play a big role in getting this deal across the line for us. I think, to their credit, the current coalition government in New Zealand, Christopher Luxon, made a big deal out of saying he wanted a FTA with India. A few people were sceptical. I include myself in that. He said he'd do it in the first term, and he's almost got it done. But I think they did benefit a lot from Donald Trump's tariffs. India did take a big hit from that. And I think that has probably encouraged the Indian government, which has been in the past pretty protectionist, to say, well, actually, we are going to need to find some friends and maybe sign a few deals where we haven't previously. So I think that has certainly moved things along and created the opportunity that the government has seized on.
Because is there value to India to be seen to be dealing with countries such as us beyond what both countries gain from it?
I think so. India is certainly trying to position itself as a global leader and a major power. So this kind of feeds into that. If they can kind of say, look, we've got this web of agreements, that we've got one with New Zealand, they've signed one with Australia previously, just recently the European Union, and they're finalising a deal, I think, with the US. So it kind of says, hey, we're a global player, we are taken seriously. We are going to be a part of the world's future, a big part of the world's future. So I think it certainly feeds into that at a diplomatic and soft power level.
Gaurav says there's no doubt that global events played a part in hastening this agreement.
I think two things changed. The bottleneck from New Zealand's side was always dairy. That's why the talks stalled in 2015 after going on for 5 years.
So we gave up on dairy, didn't we?
Yeah, you have to realize it that, after this year, India did a trade deal with European Union and US, two biggest marketing blocs and the powerful economies in the world. They also didn't get dairy, right? So for New Zealand to think for the next 100 years that India will open the market of dairy for New Zealand exporters is not going to happen. Even on 22nd December, the Trade Minister of India, Piyush Goyal, reporters asked him in the press conference, why is this note that, if you ever open dairy to another country, New Zealand will also get that benefit? He said, because New Zealand insisted, but I'm categorically saying we are not opening dairy ever, right? So that
right.
is from... To anyone.
Yeah.
So that is the thing that settled it from New Zealand side. And I think from Indian side, India was never interested in New Zealand because it's a small country, they don't think that the market is big for their exporters. But in the last couple of years or so, India has started looking at the defense ties with New Zealand. If you look at it, when Luxon was invited last year to go to India, he gave a speech on international security, shared Indo-Pacific security threats. That was his speech in Raisena Dialogue. He went to a naval base in Mumbai. Indian naval ships have visited New Zealand. And something that people have missed, but I'll point out, there is a change of Indian High Commissioner. The existing one is leaving and a new one is coming. And the new High Commissioner of India and New Zealand was looking after international security in Delhi. So that for watchers of geopolitics, that's a important marker that somebody who was looking after international security affairs in the central government in Delhi is now the new High Commissioner.
So a very deliberate pick by India to put a
Absolute-
military man essentially in that job. Just a note here, the military man is in fact a woman, Mwanpui Sayowi.
Because now everyone is talking about China and what is happening in Indo-Pacific. But suddenly, because of the rise of China, people have started looking at India differently. And now people are also willing to sit on the table and talk to India about, getting market access and more so about defense ties.
But Sam says the clock is ticking on getting this deal signed, and that's because of its most favoured nation clauses.
And it doesn't apply across the board, but it applies to a few industries. And I guess one of the crucial ones for us is wine. So there's a line or a few lines in the trade agreement that say if any other country gets a better deal in terms of tariff reductions on wine in the future, we will match that for you. So it would mean, and this is very relevant because the EU has already got a better deal. We've seen some of the key outcomes, and they have got a better deal for their wine producers. So the EU has to ratify that deal on their side. We've got to ratify the deal on our side. So it's sort of a bit of a race, If the EU gets across the line first, and that deal enters into force, and we're too late, then India says, well, actually, no, it's not a future agreement anymore, the EU one. So we don't have to match it. So we've got to get in first, basically, if we want to be able to claim the benefit of that.
And I mean, you would think New Zealand's lawmakers are more nimble than the EU's, you would hope.
Very diplomatic of you, Alexia. Yes, I think the EU and Brussels renowned for their interminable bureaucracy.
So is it likely that we will be able to do this? I mean, when New Zealand First obviously objects, Labour says it hasn't even seen the script.
Yeah, look, I do question the way that this has been handled by the government. I think they would have known for a long time, or should have known, that it was going to be very difficult to get New Zealand First across the line to back this. So they had to go to Labour, but I think Chris Hipkins has said the first approach from National didn't come until the day they actually announced that they'd concluded negotiations. He said that Christopher Luxon hasn't picked up the phone and called him, hasn't had a meeting with him. So there doesn't seem to be a lot of effort going into woo Labour. Now, I do think it's more likely than not that Labour will get behind this deal because it does have an economic benefit for the country. It will mean a lot for exporters. There's also a political element here, right? It's an election year. We have a reasonably large Indian diaspora in New Zealand. Do you really want to be the party that sinks this deal and annoys a nation of 1.4 billion people and the people who live here? So I think they'll get there in the end, but how long it will take, I'm not sure. I think there's certainly a bit more that needs to be done by the government to sort of ease the concerns that have been expressed about this deal and ensure there's enough transparency. We haven't seen the deal yet. It's still going through this legal scrubbing.
But if Labour objects to certain clauses, surely they can't revisit it if it's already been negotiated.
That's right. So I think what Chris Hipkins has said is, look, we're not going to try and renegotiate any parts of the deal because that can't happen. What we want to do is make sure that there are enough safeguards and protections in place on our side that we can sort of unilaterally do. So he's talked about migrant exploitation and making sure there's enough resource around that. He's talked about the education institutes and making sure there's enough rules and regulations in place to ensure they're of sufficient quality and that they aren't just being used as an excuse to issue visas. So you can put some of that in without having to go back to India and saying, let's rip this up and start again.
That's it for today. The Detail is a newsroom production supported by RNZ and New Zealand On Air. This episode was engineered by Jeremy Ansell and produced by Gwen McClure. Thanks to Newsroom's Sam Sachdeva and RNZ's Gaurav Sharma. I'm Alexia Russell. Ka kite.